Beneath the red horizon of Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, where dunes stretch like sleeping seas, there lies a hollow untouched by wind. The air there feels older than memory, carrying a dry sweetness of sand and stone. Among the drifting hills stands a fragment of basalt, half-buried, sun-bleached, its surface carved with spirals and lines that no one has yet translated. When the moonlight leans against it, the stone seems to breathe. The earliest record of its discovery dates to the 1930s, when a British archaeologist named Hugh Elrington crossed the southern Arabian wastes in search of the lost city of Ubar, the fabled Iram of the Pillars. His notes, later found in a weather-stained journal, describe a basalt monolith singing beneath the wind, carved with marks unlike Sabaean or Thamudic. He camped beside it for 3 nights, certain it predated known civilizations, certain it was not man-made in any ordinary sense. When he returned to Aden, his words were uncertain, half field report, half confession. "The stone hums," he wrote, "when the desert sleeps. In the stillness, one might imagine the first artist or priest kneeling before that same monolith thousands of years earlier. No chisels have been found nearby, no shards, no dwellings, no graves. Just the stone itself, heavy with presence." Local Bedouin believe it was a relic of the Ad people, a vanished tribe mentioned in the Quran, who built lofty columns unmatched in all the land. To them, this was not merely a ruin but a remainder, a single syllable of a language spoken before humanity learned to speak. Modern archaeology offers guesses. Early Neolithic petroglyphs, a meteorite fragment, a naturally resonant geode. But the sound, the soft, interior hum reported by those who've stood near it at dusk, refuses explanation. Some say it's the desert's wind caught in a hollow. Others think it's the vibration of the earth itself, magnified by the stone's mineral core. Yet when you kneel beside it, the sensation feels less like sound and more like memory, a pulse echoing through basalt and bone. At night, the desert glows faintly, the sky unraveling with stars. The traveler traces the carvings with a gloved hand. Each line seems to curl inward, looping toward its own center like an ancient spiral galaxy. For a moment he recalls the spiral motifs found in Göbekli Tepe, in the high plateaus of Anatolia, sanctuaries built around 9000 BCE, long before writing. Those carvings, too, seem to whisper of something pre-human, a language not of words, but of pattern and repetition, as if the earth itself were teaching. He thinks of the caves of Tassili Eniger in the Sahara, painted with beings half-human, half-celestial, and wonders if this stone belongs to the same forgotten family of symbols. Across continents, across ages, humanity once seemed to mark the same shapes. The spiral, the eye, the hand, the gate. Not art, not message, perhaps memory. When the lantern dims, the stone's faint vibration deepens. It does not speak, yet it communicates, like breath drawn through the hollow of time. The traveler recalls Elrington's words again, carved before language, carrying something that remembers. He imagines the world when the deserts were green, when the Gulf was a fertile plain crossed by rivers. There, at the dawn of agriculture, small tribes settled around springs and learned to shape the earth. Some scholars call this the Green Arabia period, between 8000 and 5000 BCE, when rainfall and vegetation covered what is now endless sand. Perhaps this stone was part of a sanctuary from that forgotten age, an altar to the breath of creation. The myths that survive echo the same idea, that the first humans did not worship the gods but listened to them through matter, through stones that vibrated when the divine passed near. In Mesopotamian tablets, gods fashioned humankind from clay, mixed with the voice of the deep. In the oral legends of southern Oman, there is talk of the speaking mountains, ridges that rumbled before earthquakes, voices mistaken for revelation. When the traveler rests his palm upon the surface, he feels warmth where there should be none. The symbols seem to shift with the moon's shadow. One resembles the curve of the Tigris, another the shape of a crescent vessel, another a hand open and ascending. His mind drifts. Perhaps these were not words at all, but sound given form, a hymn fossilized in stone. Evening brings a sky the color of tea. Bats unhook themselves and write their cursive against the fading gold. The ferryman rinses his hands in water warm as a palm and rests the oar upon its notch. On the far bank, a monk lights a slim candle and bows. The flame wavers, tinier than a thought. The ferryman thinks of the vial of silt and how it holds, in a single quiet column, what the river knows. That direction is a story we tell ourselves, that everything that goes returns in another shape, that forgetting and remembering are two names for the same tide. He lifts the vial, studies the grains, and for a moment sees them as a city seen from the sky. Avenues, canals, moats, courtyards filled with lotus, faces smiling from towers as if blessing the flood. Night lowers itself carefully. Frogs begin their liturgy. At the landing, the ferryman ties the boat and sits back, spine against wood that has known his weight since youth. Somewhere beneath the surface, a catfish moves with the gravity of an old king. The current presses north, patient as a prayer. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood as a miracle, only recognized as a rhythm. Perhaps the river does not carry time away so much as loosen it. Let it breathe, rinse it of dust and return it softer. Perhaps all we can ask of water is what the elders ask at the festival. Not abundance, not certainty, only that the turning continue. And when sleep leans close, the ferryman hears the small bells again and the wooden knock of the hull against the post. And in that steady, moonlit tapping, the whole world seems to sway with the tunnel sap, reversing without breaking, remembering without grasping, flowing the way a story flows when the voice grows quiet and the listener drifts, and the last words fold into silence like oars lifted from water, shining for a moment in the dark before vanishing into the breath of the night. High in the Himalayas, beyond the last prayer flags of Zanskar, there stands a cliff shaped like folded hands. Wind has polished its face until it gleams with veins of mica that catch the dawn like frozen incense smoke. At its base lies a gate, a perfect arch cut into the rock, neither sealed nor open, a frame around darkness. The monks of Phuktal Monastery call it the silent door. They say it has no hinge because it does not open outward, and no handle because it opens only inward. Early explorers wrote of it in brief margins. A shadowed arch noted by Sven Hedin in 1909. A carved aperture inexplicable, in a surveyor's log from the British Great Trigonometrical Survey. Modern climbers reach it rarely. Avalanches guard the final approach. When they do, they find no inscription, no ornament, only a surface smoothed by centuries of touch. Local herders leave butter lamps before it each winter solstice. They believe that when the wind stops for a single heartbeat, the mountain breathes through the gate and the world renews itself. Inside, ground-penetrating radar shows a cavity perhaps 20 meters deep. Yet no passage connects it to any known chamber. The emptiness resists both camera and echo. Sound collapses in its throat. Once, a film crew tried to record the silence. The microphone registered nothing, not even static. "The quiet ate the machine," one technician said, half laughing. The monks nodded. "Then it has accepted you." Legends say the gate was carved by followers of Padmasambhava in the 8th century, the same era that birthed the caves of Alki and Tabo, when artisans turned stone into scripture. Others whisper it predates Buddhism entirely, a remnant of Bon rituals that sought not enlightenment but listening. In those older chants, the word for salvation and silence are the same syllable, drawn out like a sigh. Each dawn, a single monk walks the narrow path from the monastery to sweep the snow away. His name is Tseyering. He carries no bell. He believes bells would disturb the door. His breath forms brief clouds that vanish before they rise. He kneels, wipes the threshold with a cloth soaked in melted snow, and sits until his heartbeat slows to the mountain's pace. Travelers who have watched from afar say he stays for hours, unmoving, a small flame in robes of saffron against the stone's gray. They do not hear what he hears. Tseyering speaks little, but in the evenings he tells newcomers the story of the sculptor. Long ago, when the world was louder, a craftsman came seeking refuge from his own voice. He carved a doorway into the cliff so that silence might have a place to dwell. When he finished, he stepped through, and was never seen again. Some say he became the stillness inside. Others, that he is the echo waiting for those who will listen. A warm wind passes, stirring the sand like breath over a drum. The hum softens, then vanishes. For a while, there is only the silence that follows understanding. The traveler closes his notebook. He knows what others will say, that it is resonance, pressure, heat expansion, imagination. But imagination, he thinks, is only memory turned inward. Perhaps the ancients carved what they could no longer recall, shaping absence into symbol. The mountain around the gate hums faintly with magnetic flux. Geologists have measured it. They call it a geomagnetic anomaly, a seam where iron deposits distort the field. To the monks, it is the sound of the earth's meditation. They say that if one sits long enough, the hum moves from air to bone to thought, until the self and the mountain exchange places. One winter, an anthropologist named Mira Das came to study this phenomenon. She recorded pulses, measured decibels, plotted frequencies against the wind. Her instruments showed that when the wind drops below 2 knots, the surrounding rock cancels ambient noise almost perfectly, an acoustic shadow rare outside engineered anechoic chambers. "The silence is physical," she wrote. "It has mass." Yet in her field journal she added something the data could not hold. "After an hour I began to hear my own blood as thunder. The body becomes unbearable until it dissolves." She stayed a month. Each day she joined Sayering at the threshold. Each evening she returned to the monastery and found her notes shorter. By the end of her stay she wrote only fragments. Stone breathes / thought slows / door within door. When she left, she sealed her recorder in a wooden box and never played it again. Centuries before her, Tibetan hermits practiced Naiju, the yoga of still sound. They would meditate beside glaciers until they could hear the snow fall. Texts recovered from Dunhuang describe gates of listening, cut into rock where initiates sat to confront the echo of their own breath. The gate of silence fits that lineage, a place built not for passage but for return. In the monastery archives lies a single parchment wrapped in silk. Its script, traced in gold dust, reads, "When the last word is spoken, the door opens." No one agrees whether that means the end of language or the end of thought. Either way, the monks guard the phrase as gently as they guard the gate. One evening, Mira asked Sayering whether anyone had ever gone beyond. He smiled without lifting his eyes. "Everyone goes beyond," he said. "Only some remember the way back." She asked what lay inside. "Nothing," he answered. "That is why it is full." Outside, snow began to fall, large flakes that made no sound when they struck the ground. The valley turned silver. In that hush, she understood why the gate endures. Not as monument, but as mirror. It reflects whatever quiet we carry within. Spring comes late to Zanskar. When it does, meltwater traces thin veins across the stone, each droplet glimmering like a syllable erased as soon as written. Pilgrims arrive with bundles of juniper, burn them near the arch, and whisper prayers not for wealth or healing but for stillness. Some weep without knowing why. Others leave offerings. A feather, a pebble, a piece of broken bell. None cross the threshold. Satellite images taken in recent years show faint terraces nearby, perhaps remnants of hermit cells. The ruins suggest a community that lived centuries ago on soundless devotion. Archaeologists plan to dig when weather allows, though permits stall. The monks say excavation would wake the mountain too suddenly. The mountain, they insist, should wake itself. At dusk, the sky deepens to cobalt, and the cliff seems to inhale. The air stills. For a heartbeat, everything, the wind, the birds, the breath, stops. Then, from nowhere, a tone low as earth tremors fills the valley, felt rather than heard. It lasts a moment, then vanishes. Those who have waited years for that moment describe it as both ending and beginning. Instruments record nothing. Some researchers who have visited since the 1970s have attempted to trace its age through luminescence dating. Results remain inconclusive. The basalt could be 8,000 years old, perhaps older. A geological report noted unusual magnetic alignment, suggesting it may have been quarried from deep volcanic layers now lost beneath dunes. But none of that explains the precision of the carvings, or their alignment with celestial north. Sayering says that is when the gate opens, not outward into air, nor inward into cave, but into the silence that lives between heartbeats, between the questions and their answers. He says anyone may enter, but few can remain, because the world behind the door is weightless, and the ego has no gravity there. When Mira returned home, she published a paper titled Acoustic Anomalies in Karst Structures of the Western Himalaya. It lists measurements, not miracles. But in her personal journal she wrote a single sentence. Perhaps silence is the oldest language, and the gate is simply the world remembering how to speak it. Years later, satellite photographs will show that the arch casts a perfect ellipse of shadow at noon on the winter solstice, aligning with the monastery's main prayer hall. Geometry, coincidence, or design, no one can say. The monks smile at the discovery. They have known its timing for centuries. On that day each year they chant nothing, light no lamps, ring no bells. They sit facing the gate until dusk, letting the mountain breathe through them. When night falls, stars settle on the peaks like candles. The gate gleams faintly, its mica veins shimmering as though stirred by unseen light. Snow drifts against its base, filling the threshold until it disappears. Sayering watches, nodding. Even silence must rest, he murmurs. In the morning he will sweep the snow away again, as he always does. Somewhere within the rock, or within the listener, a whisper endures, softer than breath, older than thought. Perhaps it is the sculptor's sigh, or the mountain's pulse, or the echo of our own longing to be still. Whatever its source, it asks nothing, promises nothing. Simply waits the way sleep waits, patient and absolute. And so the story ends not with opening but with listening. The traveler seated before the gate, the wind easing, the sound folding inward until there is nothing left but the slow rhythm of the heart, and even that begins to fade, leaving a hush wide enough for the world to begin again. South of the Dead Sea, where heat makes the air tremble like liquid glass, a salt plain stretches between Jordan and Israel. There, beneath a crust that crunches underfoot, lies a city that once tried to imitate heaven. Archaeologists call the mound Khirbet Kamar, the ruins of the moon. Satellite imaging shows a ring of foundations arranged in perfect symmetry around a central pool, a geometry too deliberate to be accident. What the excavation teams found inside the ring in 1999 was stranger still. Thousands of mirror shards fused with gypsum and sand, their backs painted with copper pigment that had turned green with centuries. When brushed clean, they still caught light. The first explorers reported the sensation of walking through a frozen reflection. Even the walls, thin veneers of polished selenite, threw back distorted images of faces and sky. Beneath layers of ash, they uncovered tablets inscribed in late Edomite script, speaking of a place called Kur HaZahav, the city of light upon light. The words repeated the refrain, "What we see, we become." Scholars date the site to the 8th century BCE, the period when desert trade routes carried copper from Timna and incense from Sheba. The city's founders, desert artisans and priests of the lunar cult, built their dwellings around a mirrored basin fed by underground springs. At full moon the basin shone so bright travelers mistook it for the sky itself. They believed that by perfect reflection one might glimpse the face of the divine. But mirrors are jealous instruments. They hold light only by returning it. The chronicles etched on ceramic fragments tell of an eclipse, the night when the moon dimmed and the city darkened with it. Panic followed. Priests covered the pool with linen, fearing that if heaven's light vanished, their own souls would dissolve. In their silence the water receded, leaving a crust of salt so brilliant it blinded. When the rains came, the walls collapsed inward, and the basin swallowed the city like an eye closing. When dawn creeps across the horizon, the light breaks like water against the stone. The surface glows faintly, edges lined with gold. The traveler photographs the carvings, though the images never capture what the eye perceives. Some part of the stone resists translation, not in its shape but in its atmosphere. Even in daylight it feels alive, waiting. Centuries of shifting sand buried Kur HaZahav until the 20th century, when a flash flood exposed its edge. Excavators unearthed corridors lined with mirror tiles. Each tile bore fingerprints, as though pressed by those who installed them while the plaster was wet. One archaeologist, Leah Ben-Or, noticed that the tiles tilted slightly downward. They were never meant to reflect the sky, she wrote. They were meant to reflect us. Under a collapsed dome, she found a circular hall, the Hall of Resonance. Its floor was paved with onyx and mother of pearl. At its center lay a column of black glass 4 meters high, smooth as frozen smoke. Scientific analysis later showed it to be obsidian imported from Anatolia, polished until it behaved as a perfect mirror. Facing it, the room doubled endlessly. A person standing before the pillar seemed suspended between twin worlds. The ancients may have used it for oracles. Heat rising from lamps behind the glass could have made the images ripple, convincing the faithful that the mirror breathed. Leah recorded something she could not publish. While alone in that hall, her heartbeat slowed until she could no longer tell whether the sound she heard came from her chest or from the glass. It felt, she wrote, as if the stone were remembering me. Science offers less poetry. Geologists attribute the city's destruction to subsidence. The hollow salt beds below the plain collapsed after an earthquake. The mirrored pool cracked, flooding the foundations. Gypsum crystals grew, forcing walls apart until the city folded inward, its reflection consuming itself. Still, even in ruin it gleams. At dusk the salt crust glows violet, and when wind lifts the dust, for a heartbeat the horizon fills with phantom walls, shining as though the city were surfacing once more. Local Bedouin call that shimmer Beit El-Anan, the house of longing. They claim voices rise from it at night, whispers like wind against glass. Some refuse to camp nearby, believing the mirrors still hunger for light. Others collect small flakes of salt that bear patterns resembling eyes, selling them as amulets to pilgrims bound for Mount Nebo. In museums, fragments from Kur HaZahav sit behind non-reflective glass, their surfaces dulled by time. Yet when strong light touches them, a faint gleam remains, the color of distant lightning. The curators cannot polish them. The material crumbles under cloth, as if it prefers to blur its own memory. In recent years, a team from the Hebrew University used photogrammetry to reconstruct the layout. Their digital model revealed that every street aligns with lunar rise at midsummer, and every mirrored panel faces the basin's center. The whole city was a single instrument tuned to the light of the moon. When that light failed, the harmony broke. It is the oldest example we know of a civilization building its theology entirely on reflection. Others would try. Alexandria's lighthouse mirrored the sun. Ravenna's mosaics caught candlelight like captive stars. Versailles multiplied royal faces until power became its own image. But Kur HaZahav dreamed it first and paid the oldest price. Leah returned a final time before the site was sealed against further erosion. Rain threatened. The salt crackled beneath her boots. She paused by the basin's rim. The water had gathered again in a shallow film, smooth as mercury. In it she saw not her reflection but the pale outline of clouds moving faster than the wind. For a moment the world inverted. Sky below, earth above, self nowhere. Then a drop struck the surface, and everything dissolved into ripples. She laughed softly. Perhaps that was the city's last lesson, that to see clearly is to vanish. When she died years later, her notebooks were found wrapped in foil. The final page held one sentence: "The mirror does not remember the face, only the light that touched it." Before leaving, he gathers a handful of sand, presses it between his fingers, and lets it fall. The grains glitter with mica, remnants of ancient seas. The desert once an ocean, the stone once seabed, memory once silence. Tonight the plain lies silent. The moon, nearly full, lifts over the black ridge of Edom and lays a path of silver across the salt. Wind stirs, and the crust breaks into scales that glint and fade. A caravan passes miles away, their lanterns reflected in a shimmer that is not there. For a heartbeat, walls seem to rise, corridors bloom from dust, and the basin fills once more with trembling light. Then the wind turns, and the mirage collapses inward, the way all memories do when looked at too closely. Perhaps the city still exists, folded within its own reflection, waiting for another eclipse to balance shadow with light. Perhaps the gate of the moon opens only when nothing is left to see. Or perhaps, like every civilization that mistook its image for eternity, it survives only in the thin film between vision and silence. Whatever the truth, the desert remembers the shimmer. When dawn comes, footprints fill with light instead of shadow, and the salt hums faintly under the first heat. The city sleeps beneath, polished by centuries of forgetting, dreaming of its lost sky, and somewhere within that luminous crust, a single flake catches the sun and turns it inward, one last mirror still holding the world in its fading glow, before the wind erases even that, and the desert resumes its endless act of reflection. In the high valley of Ladakh, where the nights are so clear that the Milky Way throws shadows on the stone paths, there lies a monastery whose garden blooms only after dusk. It is small, no larger than a courtyard, yet monks have tended it for more than 8 centuries. The locals call it Tang Serpa, the golden field, though no grain ever grew there. What it bears are flowers that open beneath starlight, their petals pale blue by day and radiant silver by night. Botanists who visit the place call the blossoms Sausuria noctilix, a mountain cousin of the snow lotus. The monks simply call them thigcha, breathing stars. Their fragrance rises only when the air cools enough for frost to form on the stones. Each evening, as the sun disappears behind the Karakoram, the novices light small butter lamps along the walls and whisper a single mantra. May the sky find itself in us. The garden was first recorded in 1273 CE by a wandering scholar from Kashmir named Sultram Gawa. His journal, now kept in the library of Le Palace, describes a walled terrace filled with luminescent herbs that shimmer like constellations fallen to earth. He believed the monks cultivated them according to a forgotten discipline of sky herbalism, in which plants were sown under specific stars and watered at precise lunar hours so that root may remember heaven. Modern astronomy confirms that the stone beds align exactly with the constellation Orion as it rises in early winter. The monks sow each section when Betelgeuse first appears above the ridge, then prune when Rigel clears the horizon. Whether coincidence or ancient design, the geometry holds. The garden is a map of the night turned inward. Each midnight in the brief Himalayan summer, the abbot walks its narrow paths with a wooden staff tipped in bronze. He pauses before each blossom, touches its center with the staff, and murmurs a verse from the Zung's Chi Rajayad. All that flowers is remembrance. He says that the garden is not grown for beauty or medicine, but for memory, that the stars once spoke through these petals, and will again when the sky forgets itself. In a quiet moment he wonders if the hum is the sound of the earth remembering itself. Not language, not signal, but continuity. The same vibration that moves through tectonic plates, through heartbeats, through history. In the 1970s, a team of ethnobotanists from Delhi climbed to Tang Serpa to collect specimens. They found the soil unusually rich in iron and silicates, dust blown from the meteor fields of Chongtang Plateau. Under ultraviolet light the petals emitted a faint fluorescence. The researchers traced it to microscopic crystals embedded in the cells, probably fragments of meteoric quartz. To science, they were mineral inclusions. To the monks, they were the garden's memory, the sky's gift to the earth. One scientist, Dr. Anita Rao, stayed through a lunar cycle. She wrote that the garden changed her sense of time. At night, she recorded, the air vibrates as if full of invisible wings. The flowers pulse faintly, each on its own rhythm, like breathing. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by attention itself. When she returned home, she published a sober paper on alpine fluorescence. But in her private notebook she added, perhaps the stars are roots, and we the branches that forgot to look upward. The monks tell an older story, that long before the monastery was built, a meteor fell into this valley. The crater filled with rain, and from that water grew the first night flower. A shepherd found it glowing at dawn and brought it to a hermit, who planted its seed within a ring of stones. Over generations the ring became a terrace, the terrace a garden, the garden a vow. Each abbot inherits the duty to keep the blossoms alive. For as long as they bloom, the stars will not abandon the world. During winter, the valley sleeps under snow, yet the monks claim the roots continue to hum beneath the frost. They say if you press your ear to the ground on the solstice, you can hear a low resonance like the drone of a distant bell. Seismographs placed nearby once captured a faint vibration unrelated to wind or tectonic shift, an oscillation repeating every 9.6 hours, roughly the rotation period of a large planet. The researchers shrugged. The monks smiled. Jupiter breathes, they said. At dusk, the novice Tenzin waters the beds with melted snow carried from the glacier above. He has never left the valley. Each drop catches the last sunlight and flashes like a spark before disappearing into soil. He thinks often of the cities beyond the passes, Delhi, Lhasa, Srinagar, whose lights drown the stars. They will forget how to look up, he tells the abbot. The abbot replies, then we must remember twice as deeply. Some nights tourists arrive, drawn by rumor. They photograph the blossoms, the lamps, the quiet faces. The camera flashes startle the moths. The monks do not complain, but after the visitors leave, they walk the garden in silence until the rhythm returns. One of them explains gently, every image we take must be paid for with listening. In 2015, after a heavy monsoon, part of the terrace collapsed. Beneath the fallen stones lay a layer of blackened soil and shards of glazed pottery. Among them, archaeologists found a bronze astrolabe engraved with Tibetan and Arabic numerals, evidence of trade between these mountains and the scholars of Samarkand. The dials really mapped not stars but phases of the moon. It had been buried with a seed pod of the fig cha, wrapped in silk. Carbon dating placed it around 1380 CE, the century when plague and cold dimmed the known world. Perhaps someone had hidden both instrument and seed as a promise that knowledge would flower again. Later, when his journey ends and he recounts the tale in distant cafes and lecture halls, the memory remains unchanged. The faint sound beneath his bones, the weight of the air, the feeling that he was being observed by something that had never ceased to exist. His notes fill with sketches and theories, but between each line are pauses too long to read. Pauses filled with that same resonance. The astrolabe now rests in the National Museum at Delhi. Its bronze has turned the color of tea. Its needles no longer turn. Yet each winter solstice, when the monks light their lamps, the abbot faces south and lifts a replica toward the sky, aligning its empty circle with Orion. He whispers the old blessing, "May the garden within remember the stars without." From the ridge above the monastery, the view at night is absolute. The Milky Way arcs from horizon to horizon, mirrored faintly in the narrow irrigation channels that glimmer like veins of mercury. The flowers seem to respond, their petals half open, vibrating with a light that is neither reflected nor emitted, but shared. To stand there is to feel that every star has a twin in the soil, and that the earth is only the sky slowed into form. Astronomers who later examined pollen grains from the valley discovered isotopic anomalies consistent with micrometeoric dust. They concluded that the plants, over centuries, had absorbed trace elements from space. The monks call it tattva suchness. The scientific report ends differently. The boundary between biological and cosmic material is less distinct here than elsewhere. Both sentences mean the same thing. When dawn approaches, the light thins from silver to blue. The flowers close, their glow retreating inward. Frost melts, carrying the night's memory back into the earth. The abbot stands at the gate and bows once to the fading stars. They are not leaving, he says. They are returning to their roots. Then he turns the small prayer wheel by the path, releasing the day. For those who sleep nearby, dreams come bright and slow. Endless fields of dark petals beneath a breathing sky, the sound of snowmelt like whispered prayer. Perhaps it is only the mind echoing the rhythm of the place. Perhaps the garden truly remembers. In the language of the monks, the word for memory and the word for light share the same syllable. They say both must be tended daily, or they fade. When night comes again, the lamps are lit, and the cycle begins anew. Petals opening, constellations blooming, the garden listening upward. The stars, scattered like seeds, answer with their own slow shimmer, and for a few quiet hours the distance between heaven and soil disappears. And somewhere far above, a meteor drifts through the thin breath of the atmosphere, burning softly as it falls. A spark returning to the roots that once remembered it, to a garden that waits patiently in darkness, faithful to the oldest duty of all, to keep the sky alive in the earth's dreaming heart. Deep beneath the Andes of Colombia, where tunnels curve like the veins of a sleeping mountain, there lies a cathedral carved entirely from salt. Its corridors shine with a pale, lunar glow, as if moonlight had been trapped underground. Pilgrims descend through its spiraling chambers in silence, passing walls that sparkle faintly, their crystals absorbing every whisper. The miners who dug it called it La Cathédrale de Sal. The priests who blessed it called it a miracle. The geologists who measured it called it a collapse waiting to happen. But those who have stood within its vast nave know it by another name, the memory of light. Years afterward, satellites map subsurface anomalies beneath Rub al-Khali, linear ridges, circular depressions, patterns suggestive of buried architecture. The desert once again begins to move, and some whisper that beneath those dunes lies not one stone, but a field of them. A buried chorus, a forgotten alphabet still breathing below our feet. The first miners of Zipaquirá came in the 16th century, following veins of halite that had once been the floor of an ancient sea. They worked by candle and pick, chiseling small altars where they prayed before each shift, salt crosses shining in the dark like stars reflected in water. Over centuries the tunnels deepened, and with them the prayers. When the old mine flooded and was abandoned, the echoes remained. Then, in 1954, a new shaft revealed a chamber wide enough to house a cathedral. It was the miners themselves who hollowed it, not as engineers but as believers, shaping each wall until it breathed holiness. They said that salt, when cut, sings. Today, pilgrims walk the same descent, guided by blue light. The air tastes faintly of iron and sea. In the stillness, you can almost hear the past dripping from the ceiling, a slow rhythm of dissolution and rebirth. Each step carries you farther from the world of sound. The guide's voice fades first, then footsteps, then the heartbeat, until all that remains is the soft breathing of the earth. Here silence has weight. In one chamber, a massive cross rises from the floor, illuminated only by hidden lamps. It seems suspended in mist, both solid and unreal. The walls around it are carved into reliefs. Hands, shells, ripples, symbols of the ocean that once covered this mountain 250 million years ago. Geologists explain that the rock here formed when the Andes folded an inland sea into the sky, trapping its salt beneath pressure and time. What was once surface became memory. To the miners, that history was not science but scripture. They believed the salt remembered the sea and would one day return to it. Farther within, the air grows warmer, heavy with mineral scent. The walls glow with streaks of violet and white, veins of sodium and magnesium interlaced like threads of breath. Touch them, and a faint warmth answers from the stone. Some visitors leave handprints, others, prayers etched by fingertips. Over years, The salt slowly erases them, absorbing each intention until the wall appears untouched. The mountain forgives everything by forgetting it. In the 1990s, engineers stabilized the passages with arches and pillars of carved halite. During excavation, they discovered small cavities filled with brine, perfect mirrors trembling with unseen light. When disturbed, the water vibrated in harmonic tones, as if tuned to some subterranean hymn. One physicist recorded frequencies that corresponded to musical intervals, though no vibration could be seen. He wrote, "The salt speaks through resonance, not echo. It remembers in vibration." There are other cathedrals built from stone, glass, or iron, but none that breathe like this one. The walls absorb moisture from the air and exhale it again, keeping a constant humidity, a slow inhalation of centuries. In that breathing lies the rhythm of the mind's first builders, men who dug by instinct and prayer, guided by the faint shimmer of crystal veins. In a museum above ground, their tools are displayed. Iron chisels worn to nubs, candles fused into lumps of salt, rosaries made of mineral beads. Each object looks ordinary until light strikes it, and then it glows with the same inner pulse as the tunnels below. Every December, thousands come to the cathedral for the Mass of Light. The priest's voice rises softly, echoing against the crystal vaults until it seems multiplied. One prayer becoming hundreds, hundreds returning as one. Candles line the walls, their flames trembling in the drafts of unseen passages. When they are extinguished, the afterimage floats in the eyes of the faithful, a constellation that remains even in darkness. Scientists call this persistence of vision. The pilgrims call it faith. Legends, of course, wander deeper. The miners once spoke of a hidden chamber at the lowest level, sealed by a slab of uncut salt. They said that inside lies the heart of the mountain, a natural crystal so pure that it contains its own light. When a miner died underground, they believed his last breath joined that light, preserving his name in eternal brightness. During a cave-in in 1932, 3 men were trapped for days. When they were rescued, they claimed to have seen the crystal glowing behind a wall, like a sleeping sun. Their story was dismissed, but years later sensors detected unusual radiation near the same tunnel. Not dangerous, but unaccountable. The site was sealed for safety, though the monks say it was for reverence. A handful of modern pilgrims come not for prayer but for healing. They sit in the quiet chambers, breathing air rich with salt ions, believing it cleanses the lungs and steadies the mind. Some fall asleep, lulled by the steady drip of water, drop meeting drop, as if counting time backwards. Doctors might call it placebo. The monks call it mercy. Among them, Father Ignacio keeps the oldest candle in the cathedral. Its flame has been relit each Easter since the mine opened. When asked why, he smiles. Salt preserves, but light renews. Together they remember what the other forgets. At night he walks alone through the nave, brushing dust from statues of saints carved directly into the walls. Their faces shine with condensation, as if sweating under centuries of devotion. He touches each forehead gently, whispering their names like lost friends. In the end, the traveler writes only one final line. Not all origins are meant to be uncovered. Some are meant to be listened to. Geologists occasionally map the chambers with laser scanners, translating their surfaces into points of data. The renderings look like constellations, millions of tiny stars floating in digital darkness. One technician compared them to a sky turned inside out. Perhaps that is what the cathedral truly is. The ocean buried within the mountain, the sky buried within the ocean, and memory buried within both. On rare occasions, when the humidity rises and the air turns cold, the cathedral hums. Visitors have described it as a vibration through the chest, a note that cannot be localized. Some say it is the sound of salt expanding. Others, the echo of miners' prayers dissolved into the rock. Father Ignacio says it is the earth remembering the sea, the same sound heard when waves break in dreams. One evening, after the last visitors had left, a young woman named Sophia lingered in the nave. Her grandmother had once worked the mines, carrying tools to her husband who never returned from a collapse. Sophia carried a small vial of seawater from Cartagena and poured it at the foot of the Great Cross. For a moment, the salt around it glistened, absorbing the drop. A faint shimmer spread outward across the floor, as though the mountain itself were drinking. She whispered, "For all who were swallowed." No one saw it, but those who came the next morning said the floor seemed brighter, as if newly polished by light. In the deep stillness of the cathedral, salt crystals continue their slow growth. Every year the walls thicken by a breath. The air smells faintly of rain on stone. Visitors pass, their footsteps leaving no mark. Somewhere within the sealed chamber, the hidden crystal, if it exists, gathers the faint tremors of prayer and machine alike, translating them into silence. Above, the Andes sleep beneath clouds, their peaks sharp as hymns. Below, the mountain breathes through its veins of white fire, and between them, in the cathedral carved by human hands and sea-born memory, light and salt keep their ancient covenant, to remember what water forgets, to preserve what time dissolves. When the last lamp is extinguished and the gates close, darkness folds back over the corridors. The air cools, the dripping slows, the salt walls hum once, like a note returning to its key, and then stillness settles again, vast, weightless, alive. Perhaps that hum is nothing but pressure shifting in the rock. Or perhaps it is the world itself, remembering for a heartbeat what it once was. An ocean of light, waiting to take shape again. Across the western desert of Egypt, where the dunes roll like frozen tides and mirages tremble upon the horizon, there are nights when the wind carries the sound of hidden stone. It is a low murmur, not quite echo, not quite song, rising from beneath the sand as if the earth itself were remembering a city that once breathed there. The Bedouin call that place Al-Qamar al-Maft, the lost moon. Archaeologists, more cautious, call it the Valley of Echoes, a stretch of wasteland halfway between the Dakhla and Kurga oases, where satellite scans have revealed geometric shadows, faint lines of walls, avenues, and buried domes that no one has yet touched. And somewhere under the burning sky, the wind passes across the hollow once more. The dunes shift, the horizon trembles, and for a moment the earth hums again, low, deep, patient, like a voice speaking the first word ever spoken, and then letting it fall back into silence. When explorers first crossed this desert in the 1930s, they found fragments that made no sense. Obsidian beads polished beyond Bronze Age technique, pieces of limestone smoothed as if by flowing water, and once, a shard of pottery glazed in a color that did not exist elsewhere in Egyptian craft. A gray that shimmered like moonlight beneath dust. Locals said the shard came from a city swallowed by sand overnight, a city whose wells had turned to mirrors. Years passed, and the legend persisted. Then, in 2018, a team from the University of Cairo's Department of Archaeology returned with ground-penetrating radar. Beneath 30 meters of sand, they detected voids, chambers aligned in a circular pattern, connected by tunnels that branched like veins. The readings suggested an entire settlement buried intact. But funding dried up, permissions stalled, and the desert kept its secret. Even from the satellite view, the pattern was unmistakable. A perfect spiral expanding from a central court, a geometry echoing the golden ratio long before Greek architects named it. It was as though the city had been designed to breathe with the wind itself. Scholars proposed names: Proto-Saharan, pre-dynastic, or perhaps even mythic Zerzura, the white oasis sought by pilots during World War II. Yet the locals had no such classifications. To them, it was the city of sleepers, built by those who spoke with sand. Each evening, the wind returns. It moves softly across the dunes, shaping and erasing in the same gesture. The sound it makes is almost human, the hiss of syllables half-spoken. The Bedouins say these are the voices of the builders, still whispering through the corridors they made. The desert is full of such murmurs. Beneath Bahariya they whisper of golden mummies. Beneath Siwa, of oracles who spoke in the tongues of stars. But in Alkamar Almaft, the voice is different. Slower, deeper, like breath drawn through hollow stone. Those who have camped there tell of a phenomenon that occurs just before dawn. As the air cools, fine grains of sand begin to fall inward, forming small vortices that spiral into invisible openings. In those moments, sound seems to come from below, a deep resonance that lasts for only a few heartbeats. Scientists call it booming sand, produced when layers of dry grains collapse in unison. But to the tribes who live near the oases, it is the city exhaling, reminding the world that it is not gone, only sleeping. There are faint traces of human hands everywhere. Pieces of carved alabaster, stylized like early Old Kingdom work yet older in texture. Fragments of shell inlay from a time when the Sahara was still dotted with lakes. Hieroglyphs that resemble the earliest Tenite forms, though rendered in reverse, as if written for mirrors, not eyes. Carbon dating of a single piece of charred wood retrieved from the site gave an age of around 7,000 years. If correct, the city predates the pharaohs, the pyramids, even the myths that tried to remember them. Among the fragments found near the site was a small stone tablet, no larger than a hand. Upon it, a single inscription, a spiral enclosing a circle enclosing a single point. Beneath the symbol, 3 faint marks that could mean air, soul, or sand. No one knows for certain, but one linguist, an old Coptic scholar named Nabil Sudi, translated it in a way that has never left those who read it. What is buried does not die. It waits. In the stories told around desert fires, the city was not destroyed by drought or war, but by quietness. The priests of Alkamar had learned to listen so deeply that the wind itself began to obey them. They built towers that sang with air, and through those songs they charted the rhythm of the earth, tides of sand rising and falling like breaths. But one night, as the legend says, the priests mistook stillness for enlightenment. They silenced the city to hear the voice of creation, and in that silence, the desert closed over them. Beneath the silent plain of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris once wandered like a silver serpent, there lies a city that no longer remembers its name. Its ruins are softened by centuries of silt, not stone but clay, the same earth from which it once rose. The travelers who pass near it call the mound Tel Al-Sur, the Hill of Secrets. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a sleeping dune. Yet when the rain comes, fragments rise to the surface, shards of pottery glazed with the color of dusk, etched with patterns that seem to shimmer when wet, as if dreaming beneath the mud. The winds did not erase the city in rage, but in reverence, a burial by tenderness. The sand rose like a tide, covering streets, gardens, temples, leaving no trace but memory. The next morning, travelers passing the valley found only dunes where domes had stood. When they listened, they said they could still hear the wind humming the city's last prayer. Let what is forgotten be safe. It sounds like myth, but history often grows from myth's shadow. Archaeological surveys confirm that between 5000 and 3000 BCE, vast settlements flourished across what is now barren desert towns along ancient river channels that fed into the Nile long before Egypt's first kings. Fossil pollen reveals acacia, papyrus, even date palms once rooted there. Some scientists believe these lost oases gave rise to the earliest idea of paradise, a garden preserved in the breath of sand. One of the most haunting discoveries came not from excavation but from sound. In 2021, a Franco-Egyptian acoustics team recorded infrasonic frequencies across the valley. At certain hours, particularly when the wind shifted north, the dunes vibrated in harmonics, a pattern matching the ratios used in ancient Egyptian temple design. The frequencies corresponded almost exactly to the resonance chambers beneath the Temple of Hathor at Dendra. Coincidence, perhaps, or evidence of a shared acoustic tradition stretching back to a civilization erased by dunes. When the recordings were played back in Cairo, a curious effect occurred. The sound seemed to form shapes on the sand placed over the speaker. Spirals, waves, eyes. It was as though the city were speaking again in its own geometry. "This is architecture made of air," the lead researcher said. "They built the wind." At night, the desert transforms. The air cools, and the dunes reflect starlight as if covered in frost. You can stand there for hours and see nothing, yet feel surrounded by patience, by memory, by something vast that does not need to be named. Those who have spent long nights in the Valley of Echoes describe the sensation of standing over a sleeping being. The sand rises and falls minutely, in rhythm with breath. Some call it illusion, others kneel and listen. If you dig your hand into the dune's surface, the grains are warm, even hours after sunset. Below that, colder layers flow like liquid glass. The deeper you reach, the quieter it becomes, until you hear a single sound, a distant thrum that could be your pulse or the earth's. Either way, you find yourself listening differently afterward. In the spring of 2023, a sandstorm uncovered part of a wall. Smooth limestone carved with reliefs so faint they seemed to emerge only when touched by shadow. The fragments depicted figures holding curved staffs, facing a central disc half buried in sand. Above them were lines of small, repeating spirals. When sunlight struck the wall, the carvings appeared to ripple. A desert mirage, yes, but an intentional one. Whoever built the city had shaped stone to imitate heat itself. Archaeologists first arrived there in the early 1920s, drawn by rumors of a forgotten Sumerian site between Ur and Eridu. Their reports mention fragments of tablets, but not the kind found elsewhere in the cradle of writing. These were curved, unfired, soft to the touch, impressions of fingerprints still visible, as if the maker had only just stepped away. Many crumbled at the faintest breath. One of the expedition members, a linguist named Mayhew, described them as records of dreams, not laws or trade accounts, but something less tangible, patterns of waves, birds, and eyes, repeated again and again like a chant. He believed the people of the city wrote down what they dreamed so that the gods might read it. For a week, the archaeologists studied the exposed wall before another storm arrived. When it passed, the wall was gone, buried again. They marked the coordinates, but no one has returned to dig. "It doesn't want to be disturbed," one of them said quietly. "It breathes better under sand." Now and then, pilots flying low over the western desert report strange reflections at dusk. Flashes of light where no glass exists. Satellites capture faint glints that vanish within minutes. Some attribute it to metallic grains in the dunes. Others, more poetic, say it is the city remembering its own sky. Whatever the truth, the legend endures. That beneath the dunes lies a civilization still intact, preserved in the stillness of salt and air. When the wind shifts, it wakes for a breath, hums its old song, and sleeps again. One day, perhaps the sand will move enough for the city to surface, and archaeologists will walk its spiral streets, reading the script of the wind on its walls. But for now, it remains unseen, held in suspension between discovery and dream. And perhaps that is its mercy, because some histories, like some prayers, are not meant to be uncovered. They are meant to be listened to slowly, reverently, through the soft breath of the desert, until we realize that the civilization we seek beneath the sand is the same one that built its silence within us. Far out in the Mediterranean, beyond the broken columns of Alexandria's drowned quarter, where coral grows upon marble lions and amphorae sleep beneath drifting sand, there lies a silence so complete that divers say it hums. They call it the Library of the Drowned Isles, though no chart marks the place. To some, it is a legend. To others, an inevitability, the ocean's patient archive, preserving what fire and empire could not. The idea of it began, like all enduring myths, with a loss. In 48 BCE, Caesar's troops set fire to the ships in Alexandria's harbor. The flames leapt to the docks, to the warehouses, to the great library itself, that impossible treasury of scrolls gathered from every voyage under heaven. The smoke carried the scent of papyrus and cedar across the sea, and for centuries afterward, sailors swore they could still smell burned knowledge when the wind turned east. But what few remember is that Alexandria had other libraries, smaller, scattered, private collections kept in sanctuaries along the coast. One of them, the House of Scholars of the Tide, was said to store duplicate scrolls in waterproof cedar cases, sealed with beeswax and lead. According to fragments found in the Serapeum's ruins, its last curator, a woman named Callista of Rhodes, fled with her apprentices during the siege. They loaded their cases onto a small vessel and sailed east, intending to return when the fires ceased. The ship was last seen entering a storm near Cyprus. It was never found. At dusk, the plain turns bronze, and the mounds begin to cast shadows long enough to touch the horizon. The wind moves through them softly, as though unwilling to disturb the sleeping earth. In that stillness, it is easy to imagine the city as it once was. Not grand like Uruk with its temples of fired brick, but humble and luminous, built from river clay, each wall molded by hand. When the heat of day faded, the citizens gathered in courtyards, pressing their dreams into wet tablets before the night air hardened them. Centuries later, fishermen in the waters south of Larnaca told stories of nets torn by something vast and ordered, walls of stone beneath the waves, colonnades draped with seaweed. Some brought up tiles inscribed with Greek letters blurred by salt, fragments of bronze hinges, bits of glass colored the deep green of forest shade. Oceanographers who mapped the seafloor in the 1980s discovered an anomaly. A rectangular plateau, 90 meters down, its edges too straight for geology. The currents there swirl in circles, as if guarding a hollow. In 2019, a team from the Hellenic Institute for Maritime Archaeology began sonar surveys. What they saw stunned them. The faint geometry of a city lying intact beneath silt and coral. Avenues, courtyards, and a central structure shaped like a spiral shell. The imagery suggested vaults beneath the vaults, deep chambers carved into limestone. But storms halted the work, and permits tangled in bureaucracy. The sea closed again, indifferent, watchful. The divers who reached the site described a sensation of entering an underwater dream. Light filtered down through shafts in the waves, fragmenting into blue gold. Columns rose from the seabed encrusted with coral fans that swayed like slow flames. Fishes moved in schools through archways that once led to reading rooms. In the central hall, the spiral chamber, walls curved inward in a slow swirl, leading toward a black opening too deep to illuminate. On one expedition, archaeologist Sophia Mavridis touched a carving near the entrance. A pair of hands cupping a flame, surrounded by concentric circles. Beneath it, a phrase in faint Greek, "Tephaso pat apaliatai," the light never leaves. Later that night, as they surfaced, the divers spoke of hearing low vibrations in the water, like the sound of distant chanting. Instruments picked up no external noise, but the recording captured a rhythmic thrum matching the human heartbeat. The team's physician said it was only blood pressure changes. Yet everyone felt the same. The ocean itself seemed to be listening. The hypothesis now whispered among scholars is this: Callista's vessel did not sink by accident. She and her followers built their sanctuary at sea, a last refuge for knowledge, intended to outlive empire, religion, and fire. They carved chambers into limestone reefs, sealed them, and left the ocean to guard what humans could not. The library was never lost. It was hidden deliberately. Fragments recovered from nearby wrecks hint at the same lineage. Amphorae containing scrolls coated in resin, glass jars filled with sand and fragments of papyrus, small bronze tools shaped for engraving on coral. The carbon dating is inconsistent, yet all tell the same story: knowledge descending beneath the waves. If true, it would mean that the last library of the ancient world still exists, untouched, its shelves long dissolved, its scrolls perhaps fossilized into salt and time. A library without paper, without readers, only memory, suspended in blue silence. No other civilization is known to have practiced such a ritual, yet faint echoes appear across history. In the archives of Nippur, a single fragment speaks of those who made memory of their night visions upon the walls. In Ugarit, centuries later, myths tell of clay that retains the voice of sleep. The idea was simple and sacred. If words could record the waking world, then clay, still damp, still breathing, could hold the whispers of the unseen one. When divers descend there today, they are asked to remove all devices once they reach the threshold. Metal disturbs the currents. Sound disturbs the fish. They swim in pairs, their lamps forming cones of gold that fade within meters. Inside the spiral chamber, the water changes texture, thicker, almost viscous. The walls glitter faintly with what appears to be mica, but when touched, it feels soft, as if alive. Samples taken from the substance reveal traces of calcium carbonate and organic polymer, the slow fusion of coral growth and ancient pigment. The sea has been copying the library page by page in its own medium. A marine biologist studying those samples found something stranger still. Under ultraviolet light, they emitted a faint fluorescence, patterns like letters or symbols repeating at intervals. No one can yet explain it. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps structure. But Sophia Mavridis wrote in her private log, "The ocean remembers form even when content is gone. This is what it means to read by absence." Each dive changes those who go. Some say the silence under the surface is absolute, the kind that folds sound inward until you begin to hear your own thoughts in waves. Others say it feels like standing inside the breath of time itself. More than one diver has surfaced in tears, unable to explain why. One wrote, "It was like meeting something that had been waiting for me before I was born. The sea has always been the planet's oldest memory. Its chemistry holds every element life has ever used, every echo of light that fell through it. It remembers heat, pressure, dissolution, and perhaps now intention." The Library of the Drowned Isles is no longer only an archaeological curiosity. It is a metaphor written in tides. Knowledge that could not burn sank instead, trading air for eternity. Late one evening, the research vessel anchored above the site recorded a sudden rise in bioluminescence. The sea around them shimmered for nearly an hour, blue fire spreading outward in slow spirals, matching the layout of the structure below. The crew watched in silence, cameras whirring. Some said it was a bloom of plankton reacting to motion. Others felt it was a message, a pulse of recognition. When the glow faded, the water turned perfectly still, as if the ocean had exhaled. The footage remains inconclusive. What is certain is that in the days that followed, every metal instrument aboard began to corrode. Compass needles trembled, radios failed. Even the anchor chain developed a salt patina overnight, like aged silver. "The sea is closing again," Sophia said quietly, and the crew agreed to leave. Some scholars believe the people of Tel Al-Sur lived at the threshold between the Neolithic and the dawn of writing, around 4000 BCE. They may have been potters, river traders, or the descendants of Eridu's first builders. Their settlement stood at the edge of a shifting marshland, where reeds met salt and the air trembled with dragonflies. Clay was their blood, their calendar, their prayer. They built with it, ate from it, buried their dead in it, and perhaps, in some quiet belief, hoped to live again through it. Sometimes, when storms crossed that part of the Mediterranean, fishermen claimed to see light beneath the surface. Not lightning, but a steady radiance, as though lanterns were burning far below. They call it the reading of the sea. When asked what it means, they shrug. "Maybe the ocean is teaching itself," one says. "Maybe it reads what we've forgotten." Marine maps now list the area as a restricted conservation zone to protect its fragile coral. No one dives there officially, yet each year 1 or 2 unauthorized expeditions slip into its coordinates. Some return with fragments of carved glass, edges smooth as breath. Others return only with stories, of walls that shimmered when touched, of shadows shaped like bookshelves, of a single open doorway from which no light came, yet every diver felt drawn toward it. Perhaps the library still keeps its watchers, not human but elemental. Perhaps the currents themselves are its sentinels, weaving through corridors, turning pages of coral and stone. Perhaps, in that silent world, the knowledge of every shore that ever was has gathered, scrolls dissolved into molecules, words reduced to rhythm, rhythm to wave. If you listen closely to the sea at night, in the hush between 2 tides, you may hear it. A sound like breath moving through pages. Could be the pulse of the earth. Or it could be the ocean reading itself aloud softly to remember that once, for a brief flicker of time, the creatures who walked its shores built libraries so the world would not forget. And then, when the flames came, trusted the sea to keep the light. And perhaps it has. For even now, deep below the moonlit surface, where pressure folds sound into silence and coral writes upon the ruins, the ocean still turns its slow, eternal page, the last library, guarded not by walls, but by water, time, and the patience of remembering. Deep beneath a monastery in northern Italy, where the Apennine foothills fold into shadow, there is a lantern that has burned for as long as anyone can remember. It stands in a sealed chamber under the crypt of San Mercurio, a forgotten saint whose name appears in no litany. The monks call it La Fiamma Sotterranea, the underground flame. Its light is soft, amber, unflinching, yet it has no source that can be understood. No oil is supplied, no wick replaced. The flame lives within a glass sphere blackened by centuries of breath. Every few decades, the abbot descends to polish the soot from its casing. It always burns. Some say it began when the monastery was first built in the 9th century. Others claim it predates Christendom, a relic of Roman Mithraic rites once held in these caverns. Whatever its origin, the monks do not seek to prove it. They believe the light belongs to the earth itself. When modern restorers entered the crypt in 1972, they expected a trick, a refraction of sunlight, or a phosphorescent mineral. But the light persisted through day and night, indifferent to shadow or air. Chemical analysis of the soot on the chamber walls showed traces of magnesium and rare phosphor compounds, but no residue of burning. "It is not combustion," wrote the physicist Pietro Lorenzini. "It is something older, a light remembering fire." When later excavations unearthed what remained of a temple's foundation, they found not idols or jewels, but hundreds of small, oval discs stacked neatly beneath the floor. Each disc carried faint reliefs. Spirals, waves, suns half-sunk beneath horizons. One bore the outline of an open eye, another the curve of a sleeping face. Radiocarbon testing showed that these were renewed every generation. Fresh clay replacing old, like a pulse. The chamber lies 40 meters below ground, at the end of a corridor carved from limestone. The walls are lined with faint frescoes, stars, rivers, and a single unbroken line that spirals from ceiling to floor. It has been repainted countless times, always by hand, always in silence. The monks say the line represents the path of a soul descending through time. Each evening before Compline, Brother Luca descends the spiral staircase to tend the flame. He carries no candle, only a small bronze bell to announce his presence to the air. He kneels before the glass and whispers the same prayer, "May the hidden remain luminous." Then he sits until the last echo fades, watching how the light trembles as if listening. He once confessed that the chamber seems to breathe. The air warms near the glass, as though the flame were alive in more ways than heat. Sometimes it flickers in response to his heartbeat. Sometimes, when he prays aloud, it steadies, reflecting his face upon the glass like a second soul. Legends of eternal lamps are older than the monastery itself. Roman historians mention tombs where flames burned centuries without fuel, at the shrine of Venus, in the vault of Numa Pompilius, in the pyramids of Egypt. Early Christian chroniclers dismissed them as myth, but alchemists of the Middle Ages sought to reproduce them. They called the substance etherium, a mixture of sulfur and gold, said to capture the breath of stars. Most experiments failed, but the dream persisted, a light untouchable by time. In the archives of Bologna, there survives a single parchment from 1523 describing a holy lantern found beneath a collapsed chapel near Ravenna, burning within a crystal vessel. The note ends abruptly. Still aflame when the vessel was broken, the light dissolved into air. Some scholars believe this describes the same relic later transferred to San Mercurio. The abbey's records confirm that during a renovation in 1624, the monks sealed the chamber permanently, leaving only a small aperture for viewing. They wrote, "It does not belong to us, but to the silence below." Modern science tried once more to unravel it. In 1989, a team from the University of Parma installed instruments in the crypt. They recorded electromagnetic fluctuations near the glass, a continuous pulse at 7 Hz, the same frequency as the Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. Perhaps, Lorenzini suggested, the lantern is a resonant cavity, drawing energy from the planet's own field. He smiled when he said it, but his notes after the experiment were less certain. The light behaves like consciousness, responding to attention, altering when observed. He died a year later, leaving behind a small notebook filled with sketches of waveforms intertwined with Latin verses. The monks keep it locked in the library. They say he understood too much or perhaps not enough. To the scientists cataloging them, they were ritual tokens. To the storyteller, they were remnants of conversation between clay and cosmos. Perhaps each mark corresponded to a dream once whispered into wet earth before dawn. A child seeing the moon fall into water, a priest hearing the reeds speak, a mother dreaming of rain after years of dust. What is certain is that the flame has outlasted empires. Wars have passed above it. Earthquakes have cracked the hills. Floods have swallowed entire villages. Yet the glass remains intact, the light undimmed. When the Great Blackout of 1943 plunged the region into darkness, the abbot opened the crypt so the townspeople could descend and see it. Some wept, believing it divine. Others left flowers at the gate, saying it was the souls of the dead made visible. A geologist who studied the region once proposed that pockets of natural gas from deep vents may seep through fissures, igniting spontaneously. But gas burns unevenly. It flickers blue and dies. This flame burns gold, unwavering. It is impossible, the geologist admitted. And yet it is. Brother Luca says that the light changes him. After years of tending it, his dreams have slowed. He dreams not of people or places, but of light itself, beams bending through dust, stars sinking into water, lanterns carried by unseen hands through tunnels of stone. It teaches patience, he told a visitor. It teaches that shining is another way of listening. He once described an experience that left him trembling. During Lent, as he sat before the lantern, he heard a faint tone, like a single note struck upon glass. The sound rose, filled the chamber, and vanished. The flame did not move. Later, when he returned to his cell, he found a fine dust upon his hands that sparkled faintly before fading. Perhaps, he said softly, the light shed its skin. Every year, on the feast of St. Lucia, patron of sight, the monks lower a small mirror into the crypt to capture a reflection of the flame. They then carry it up through the corridors, lighting candles throughout the monastery. The mirror's image lasts only minutes before dimming, but in that time, the entire abbey glows with a borrowed dawn. They never let the mirror leave the grounds. The abbot warns, light that has never seen the sky should not be carried into it. When asked why, he pauses, because it might not wish to return. In the museum at Basra today, a single piece survives intact. It is small enough to fit in a palm. The inscription defies translation, yet under gentle light the lines resemble waves meeting the shore, repeating, retreating. Visitors often describe a strange quiet when they look at it, as if the sound in the room fades away. The curators say it hums faintly when humidity rises. They keep it sealed in glass, but sometimes, when the storms roll in from the Gulf, the staff swear they hear a low resonance. Not mechanical, but alive. Outside the monastery, night gathers over vineyards and rivers. The world above grows loud. Machines, sirens, wind. But beneath, the chamber remains still, its pulse steady. The monks believe that if the flame ever goes out, something ancient will pass from the earth. Not grace, but memory. For in their theology, light and remembrance are one. What shines remembers itself. A few kilometers away, in a cave newly discovered by spelunkers, scientists have found veins of phosphorescent crystal that glow faintly even without exposure to sunlight. The phenomenon may be related to piezoelectric pressure, the slow conversion of geological strain into luminescence. Yet the color of that glow, warm, gold, almost human, matches exactly the hue of the lantern below San Mercurio. Coincidence, perhaps, or evidence that the mountain itself burns from within. And so the flame continues, patient, unrecorded. Its light never reaches the sky. No beam escapes the cracks of the crypt. Yet the monks believe its radiance threads the world in subtler ways, through dreams, through inspiration, through the quiet urge that keeps humanity kindling new candles in the dark. One night each century, they say, the flame brightens briefly, a pulse felt more than seen. The air warms, the frescoed line on the wall glows faintly, and the monks above wake without knowing why. They call it the breathing of the hidden sun. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is the earth's deep current passing through a chamber that has learned how to listen. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath stone and time, the original light of creation still flickers, unseen, steadfast, refusing to fade. When Brother Luca finishes his final prayer of the night, he bows before the glass, the flame reflected in his eyes. "Go on," he whispers, "even if we forget you." Then he climbs back toward the world, leaving the door open just long enough for a thread of warm air to escape. A sigh of hidden radiance rising through the stone, searching for the sky that has never seen it. And far above, in the starless dark between clouds, a faint shimmer seems to answer. A reminder that even the light that never found the surface still shapes the dream of everything that does. Legends gathered around the site long before archaeology found it. Bedouin herders told of a sleeping city that surfaced during heavy rains, clay walls glistening for one night before sinking back into mud. Others spoke of lights flickering across the plain, of voices rising from the earth in unknown tongues. For generations, they avoided camping nearby, believing the ground to be restless. Science explains the lights as marsh gas, the voices as wind moving through fissures. Yet, standing there beneath the stars, such explanations feel incomplete. The traveler who lingers at the edge of the mound senses that the earth beneath is not empty. It is listening. One evening, a restorer named Alia visits the site to collect samples. The air is thick with heat, and the scent of rain lingers like memory. She kneels beside a shallow trench and finds a fragment no larger than her thumb, pressed with two curved lines, simple, delicate, precise. When she brushes it clean, the surface gleams, and for an instant she feels something impossible to name. Not discovery, not awe, but recognition, as though the pattern were something she had seen in a dream long ago. She carries it back to camp, places it under a lamp, and sketches its outline. But when she wakes at dawn, the fragment has turned to dust. Only the drawing remains, faint and unfinished. Her report records the usual notes: mineral composition, stratigraphy, humidity. But at the bottom of the page she writes a single line: "The clay remembers more than it reveals." Across centuries, the city's story continues to change shape. Some say the dream tablets were part of an early ritual of divination, others a form of communal art. One recent theory suggests they recorded seismic tremors, ancient observations of the Earth's movement. Yet none of these theories explain why the symbols recur in distant places. Carved into rock in Oman, traced in pigment on pottery from the Iranian plateau, even painted inside tombs along the Nile. It is as if the motif, the spiral, the wave, the eye migrated through time like a forgotten melody, carried in the hands of wanderers who once called this place home. There is a haunting symmetry in the thought that humanity's first memory may not have been written in words at all, but in the pulse of sleep, that the clay we now excavate was once wet with breath, molded by hands dreaming of permanence. When night falls over the plain, the wind turns cold, and the moon catches on the water that still gathers in shallow pools between the mounds. Reflections quiver like the faint outline of walls returning for a moment from beneath centuries of silence. The archaeologists pack their instruments and extinguish their lamps. The last to leave glances back. For an instant, the shadows seem to hold patterns, almost human, almost moving. Perhaps the city is still dreaming, still shaping itself beneath the dust, waiting for the rain that will once again make its walls soft enough to remember. In the quiet that follows, the desert breathes. The scent of clay lingers in the air, ancient, sacred, familiar. Somewhere beneath, the tablets crumble, the lines blur, the stories dissolve back into the earth. Yet in that dissolution lies a strange continuity. Every pot, every brick, every page ever pressed with meaning traces its lineage to these hands that once molded their nights into form. And if you listen long enough, through the hum of insects, the rustle of wind, you might hear a whisper rising from below, patient and tender, like the murmur of a dream trying to find its way back to the world of waking. Some voices, after all, do not fade. They only wait for the clay to soften again. Far in the limestone heart of Anatolia, where the Taurus mountains fold into one another like frozen waves, There lies a cave so deep it swallows the sound of its own echoes. Shepherds call it the breath of the earth. Its entrance is a slit in the rock, barely wide enough for a man to pass, but once inside, the walls widen into a vaulted chamber that seems less carved by nature than remembered by it. When explorers from the Ankara University Speleological Society first descended there in 1957, they found the floor dusted with fine silt, as if a river had once flowed through and then withdrawn. Along the lower walls shimmered a faint sheen, traces of ochre, charcoal, and powdered malachite. The team's lanterns revealed a sequence of images that no one expected. Not animals or hunts, but shapes. Lines, spirals, branching paths, and constellations. Some resembled river deltas, others mountain chains. Near the rear wall, a circle of dots surrounded by arcs glowed under lamplight. One of the researchers whispered, "This is not a painting. It's a map." Radiocarbon tests later dated the pigments to around 11,000 BCE, the end of the Ice Age, before the first known cities, long before writing. The cave, now catalogued as Curum III, may hold the oldest attempt humanity ever made to describe the world in image. But standing there, in the hush of dripping stone, the drawings feel less like depictions and more like meditations, as though the artists weren't charting territory, but tracing memory itself. The air is thick and cool. Each exhale hangs like mist. On one wall, a red spiral curls outward from a central point. Some archaeologists believe it marks the spring that once fed a vanished river, perhaps the ancestor of the Kızılırmak. Others see it as purely symbolic, a representation of movement, return, the breathing of the earth. Under the soft light of a headlamp, the pigment seems to shimmer, like a pulse caught beneath stone. Centuries later, humanity would press these same forms onto clay tablets. Grids, canals, mountain lines, the maps of Nippur and Babylon. But here, in this cave older than agriculture, the shapes carry no scale, no direction. They are not meant to measure. They are meant to remember. One winter evening, decades after its discovery, a single researcher descends again. Her name is Leyla Aslan, an archaeologist trained in both cartography and comparative myth. She enters alone, following the narrow path of rope and light into the breathing dark. Her boots press into the silt where ancient feet once passed. She stops before the spiral wall and listens. The silence is complete, so complete it begins to hum. She opens her notebook, sketches the pattern, then looks upward. Above her head, the ceiling rises into a dome glittering faintly with calcite. In that shimmer, she imagines the night sky 13,000 years ago, the constellations as they would have appeared before precession tilted them. The spiral could be Orion's belt, the branching lines, the migration of stars across seasons. She remembers that in many early myths, the first map was not of land but of heaven. The ground, they believed, was only a reflection. In the valley below, Neolithic sites such as Bonkuklu and Göbekli Tepe reveal stone circles aligned precisely with celestial points. Those builders too traced arcs and spirals, using geometry long before formal mathematics existed. The world they lived in was smaller, villages, rivers, hills, but their imagination was vast. To map was not to possess. It was to converse with creation. Layla shines her torch across another panel. The image there is more intricate, a lattice of lines intersecting like roots or veins. Some end abruptly, others loop back. In the center, a shape like an eye watches from within. She photographs it, then kneels, brushing the dust where a faint groove runs across the floor. Perhaps an ancient channel, perhaps a finger's path worn smooth over centuries of touch. Her mind drifts to the myths of the world makers. The Sumerian tale of Enki drawing rivers in clay, the Egyptian priests mapping the Duat, the underworld, so the dead could navigate by stars. Every culture has its first cartographers, and most were priests, not surveyors. To them, lines were prayers, directions, invocations. A map was never about where you were, it was about where meaning began. Outside, night falls over Anatolia. The cold gathers at the cave's mouth. Inside, time bends. Layla closes her eyes and imagines the first hand pressing pigment onto rock. No tools, no compass, just breath and light from a stone lamp. She imagines a people who wandered between snowmelt and sea, tracing not distance but belonging. When the rivers changed course, when the herds vanished, perhaps they returned here, to redraw the world as it once was, or as they dreamed it might be again. Her lantern flickers, the shadows ripple over the wall, and suddenly the spiral seems to move, expanding outward. For a heartbeat she feels the vertigo of creation, as though the map were not depicting the earth, but becoming it. The cave feels alive, the lines like veins carrying thought through stone. In later centuries, clay tablets from Babylon would show astonishing precision, the Euphrates, the city grid, the routes of caravans. But even those detailed plans owe their soul to this deeper tradition, the belief that landscape holds spirit. Modern eyes see measurement. Ancient hands saw conversation. Layla's notes record pigment analysis, hematite, carbon, kaolinite, the minerals of fire, bone, and soil. Together they form the palette of origin. She writes, "The first maps were painted not to find our way, but to remember we belong somewhere." When morning arrives, light filters faintly into the entrance. Dust motes drift like slow snow. She ascends carefully, leaving the chamber behind. The last thing she sees is that circle of dots, glimmering like a constellation captured mid-breath. Years later, satellite imaging of the region reveals something curious. The patterns on the cave walls align with the valley's ancient waterways, long buried beneath sediment. What once seemed dreamlike may in fact record real geography. Rivers now lost, plains swallowed by time. The line between myth and record blurs. Scholars debate endlessly, was Curum III the first attempt at mapping terrain, or a ritual diagram of the cosmos? Yet perhaps both answers are true. In the world before boundaries, the earth and sky mirrored each other. To chart one was to understand the other. Even today, when pilots trace routes across digital skies, when satellites measure every contour, the impulse remains unchanged, to draw meaning onto the void. Every GPS line, every glowing coordinate, is the descendant of those first spirals painted in flickering firelight. And sometimes, when Layla lectures about the site, she pauses mid-sentence, remembering the silence of that cavern, the way sound folded in on itself. She tells her students that standing there felt like being inside a living mind, the earth thinking about itself. They smile, unsure whether she speaks as a scientist or a poet. But she knows there is no difference. The cave was both an archive and a prayer. In the evening she revisits her sketches. The spiral remains unfinished. She leaves it that way, believing that some lines are meant to stay open. As the story fades, one image remains. An ancient hand, stained with ochre, tracing circles in the dark, whispering not of where to go but of how the world breathes. Perhaps the maps we inherit are not instructions but invitations, to remember the contours of wonder, the geography of belonging, the quiet terrain between knowing and mystery. And when the last lanterns dim, the cave waits patiently, its walls still breathing, its pigments still dreaming. The oldest atlas of all, not of land or sky, but of the human soul learning, for the very first time, to find its way home. In the northern forests of Poland, near the Białowieża wilderness where mist hangs low and moss breathes upon fallen trunks, there stands an oak whose age cannot be measured. Local foresters call it the Matka Korzeni, the mother of roots. Its crown touches the light of dawn, but its shadow hides something stranger. The faint outline of a sunken chamber beneath the earth, reachable only through the hollow between its roots. The first mention of it appears in an 18th century traveler's journal. A hollow beneath an oak, filled with whispering air, and something that smells of parchment and rain. No one believed him until 1976, when a team from the University of Warsaw, studying subsoil fungi, lowered a small camera through the opening. What they saw startled them. A network of wooden shelves half petrified, lined with bundles wrapped in bark and resin. Beneath layers of soil, the forest had preserved an impossible architecture. A library. When the chamber was finally opened, the air that rose from it carried the scent of ancient sap. Lantern light revealed scrolls made not from paper but from birch and linden bark, rolled tight and bound with fibers of nettle. Each one bore marks written in a dark, sap-based ink. The letters were unfamiliar, looped, curved, almost botanical, as though vines had learned to write. The excavators called them the root scripts. The bark disintegrated within hours of exposure. Yet before it did, a restorer named Eva Trzebiatowska managed to read fragments under magnification. What she found were not chronicles of kings or wars, but verses, meditations on rivers, seasons, soil. Phrases such as, "The rain remembers," "The sap listens," "The earth dreams in green silence." Botanists dated the organic material to between 400 and 600 CE, the late migration period, when tribes moved through Europe carrying myths older than empire. But some words echoed languages far older, phrases akin to pre-Slavic charms, Baltic runes, and traces of Sarmatian. The mixture suggested not a single tribe, but a meeting, a confluence of wanderers who believed knowledge could be planted, not written. Archaeological context deepened the mystery. The chamber had been carved directly into a root network. Oak and birch intertwined above, their roots forming arches over shelves of compacted clay. Samples showed that the roots themselves had grown around the chamber, not through it, as if the trees had shaped themselves to protect the texts. When dendrologists examined growth rings, they found a pattern consistent with centuries of subtle adaptation, the forest quite literally guarding its own memory. Folklore seems to recall the place in fragments. In Belarusian tales, there is mention of a talking oak that teaches words to the wind. In Lithuanian myth, the goddess Zemina, spirit of the earth, keeps her wisdom written in leaves that vanish each winter. The discovery of the bark scrolls seemed to turn these myths tangible. Scholars began calling the site Zemina's archive. Eva described the first hours inside the chamber as like reading inside a heartbeat. The walls were alive with thin white filaments, mycelium tracing every surface in patterns that resembled veins. Fungi, she realized, had woven themselves into the scrolls, feeding on ink, replicating its shape. The forest was not just preserving the texts, it was rewriting them, absorbing their language into living tissue. Among the few fragments that survived intact was one later titled The Hymn of Roots. Translated carefully, it reads, "We write with silence. The soil is our ink. Each word grows when forgotten." Historians debated whether the chamber was a monastic refuge, a druidic archive, or simply an accident of burial. But to Eva, it felt older than religion. She wrote in her notes, "This was not a place of record but of return." When carbon analysis confirmed the chamber's age, an older stratum beneath it was revealed, charred wood, animal bone, ash. Someone had burned offerings there long before the scrolls were placed. In the ash they found a shard of glass fused with sand. A lens, primitive yet deliberate. Through it, light focuses into a sharp beam, perhaps used to ignite fire through sunlight. Knowledge and flame, birth and decay, both meeting beneath the roots. At night, when the excavation lights went out, the chamber seemed to breathe. Moisture gathered on the wooden beams, dripping in slow rhythm. Some workers swore they heard faint murmuring, like wind moving through leaves underground. Psychologists would call it pareidolia, the human mind finding pattern in noise, but Eva refused to dismiss it. "The library," she wrote, "reads us as we read it." Her team attempted to reproduce the ink from residue samples. Under the microscope, the pigment revealed fragments of chlorophyll and tannin, compounds drawn from living trees. The ink, in a sense, was photosynthetic, still responsive to light. When sunlight struck the fragment directly, the faded script darkened, as if awakening. The texts were alive in the most literal way. After months of study, preservation efforts ceased. The site could not survive exposure. The entrance was sealed again to protect it from air. The forest reclaimed the mound. Only samples, drawings, and photographs remain. Yet to those who entered, the memory lingers like scent. Earth after rain, old wood, and something deeper, a presence. Years later, a storm uprooted a nearby oak. Beneath it, a hollow tunnel led toward the buried site. Within it, a few fresh roots bore faint imprints resembling script, as though the words had migrated upward, etched into new growth. The notion seems fanciful, but laboratory imaging confirmed traces of lignin discoloration matching the shapes of the root script symbols. Somehow, the forest was continuing the writing. Scholars of environmental archaeology see metaphor, mystics see proof. But between both interpretations lies the same quiet thought, that memory, like root or fungus, is not linear. It spreads, branching through darkness, carrying nourishment where no light reaches. Ava never published her final paper. Instead, she planted an oak in her garden in Lodz. In its first year, she buried beneath it a small capsule containing a copy of the Hymn of Roots. In her diary she wrote, "Perhaps the forest will remember what the world forgets." Today, the site lies unmarked. Visitors who wander through the Bialowieza forest sometimes speak of a hollow where sound changes, as if the earth itself were absorbing noise. The ground there feels soft, pulsing faintly beneath the feet. When rain falls, it gathers into small pools reflecting branches above, forming shapes that seem almost like words. Perhaps that is the truest library, one that does not preserve knowledge but allows it to dissolve, feeding the next generation of thought. The scrolls of bark, the fungal veins, the whisper of sap, all are versions of the same message, that life's deepest wisdom lies not in permanence but in renewal. In the evening hush of the forest, the old oak still stands, its bark darkened by centuries of rain. Beneath it, unseen, the roots twist in slow, patient spirals, touching the chamber once more. The air below remains damp, fragrant with decomposition and birth. And somewhere, in that black soil, the words continue to change, fading, reappearing, reshaped by time, by root, by silence. Some say if you place your ear against the trunk at night, you can hear a faint rhythm, a cadence like breathing, like pages turning in the dark. Perhaps it is the earth remembering itself. Or perhaps it is only our longing to believe that every word ever spoken to the soil still lingers there, dreaming beneath the roots, waiting to be read by those who listen without light. In the heart of Cambodia, where dawn lifts a veil of silver mist from flooded forests and stilted villages, there is a river that changes its mind. Each year when the Mekong swells with monsoon rains and moon-pulled tides, the tunnel sap turns upon itself and flows backward, carrying its brown, star-marked surface from the great river up into the lake, and with it an oceanic breath of fish, silt, and memory. The elders there say you can hear the moment of reversal if you rise before the bells. A soft hush at the water's skin, as if time were inhaling. For centuries, long boats have watched this turning. Priests in saffron once stood upon wooden landings and recited verses to welcome the returning flood. The reversal is celebrated still as Bon Om Tuk, the water festival, lanterns drifting like small celestial seeds along the current, drums echoing from banks where children run and laugh, and the night smells of incense and river weed. Yet even with its noise, the river keeps a sacred silence. It remembers what the land cannot hold. An old ferryman guides his narrow boat between flooded trees whose roots dissolve into water like crumbled ink. He was a boy when he first learned the bend of this channel. He is an old man now, but the oar's rhythm remains a prayer. Some believe the river carries away time itself and returns it months later, sifted and rearranged, as if the past were a seasonal sediment. He does not argue. He has seen house posts reappear after a storm as if risen from the lake's veiled floor. He has lifted jars from mud that were older than any story he could tell, glazed fragments of a kingdom that once commanded the forests and skies. On nights when the moon opens like a pale lotus, he ties the boat and sits upon the landing to listen to the low breath of the flood pulse, a pulse that fed Anchor's berets, those vast reservoirs east and west of temples where stones seemed to drink starlight. Some scholars say the city lived and died by water. The ferryman thinks the city never died at all, only learned to drift. There are facts that anchor the dream. The tunnel sap is a hydrological miracle, a living spiral that widens fivefold during monsoon months and then shrinks again, taking with it fish migrations so abundant that nets glitter like constellations when lifted at dawn. The lake's expansion nourished kingdoms. Inscriptions carved at Angkor Thom and Preah Khan praise the ordering of waters, and the bas-reliefs along Bayonne showboats gliding beneath banners, while rice fields stretch in ordered squares. Archaeologists call it a hydraulic city. Canals, dikes, moats, veins carved into earth to move the breath of seasons. In the 12th and 13th centuries, when Jayavarman VII raised towers whose faces smiled like sunrise, the reservoirs were full, the forests were managed, and the flood arrived as a ritual guest. Later, droughts and oversedimentation crept in with a different rhythm, and the water, so obedient to moon and rain, began to wander. Nothing remains unchanged that is made of breath and dust. Still, the river keeps its calendar. In May and June, the Mekong rises under the weight of Himalayan snowmelt and monsoon rain, and the tunnel sap reverses with a quiet certainty, the current carrying fish upstream into forests now oceanic, where nests hang low and mangroves write slow alphabets in mud. By November's full moon, the pressure eases, the current turns again, and the river resumes its southward path, spilling the lake back into the Mekong, back toward the sea. The festival marks this return. Boat races unravel like threads of light. Offerings are set upon the water. The city of Phnom Penh glows as if the stars had lowered themselves to the banks. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The ferryman hears the echo in or strokes, in the hollow thud of boat against post, in the way children's laughter thins as the dry season draws closer, and nets hang like tired wings. He was 22 when a drought revealed a line of jars in the shallows, each sealed with a cap of hardened resin. Inside were beads of agate and shell, and a narrow bronze bell the size of a thumb. A visiting researcher, a woman whose notebooks smelled of old glue and rain, told him such caches sometimes marked riverside shrines, places where travelers asked the current to carry their desires. She spoke of Khmer inscriptions that measure time by floods, of Sanskrit verses that praise a king as the river of merit. Later, in a museum where the air was pale and cool, he saw a bas-relief of a barge lined with oars, and recognized the set of shoulders, the way a rower leans into his work and finds a stillness there. He understood then why time feels different on the water. The present is a muscle, and rowing is its prayer. An egret lifts from the reeds and becomes a piece of sky. Far off, thunder mutters behind the gray seam of afternoon. He follows the curve of a channel where the trees stand like pillars of a drowned temple, and remembers stories the elders told. That beneath the silt of tunnel sap sleep stones from the age of Angkor, lintels and lintel stones, carved with curling foliage and guardians, stones that once held gateways which measured not kings but seasons. He has never seen those gateways, yet he believes in their breath. The lake keeps many rooms, and not all of them are for human feet. When the flood runs at its highest, fish erupt through the drowned forest like scattered script. The ferryman learned to read them as a boy, the way a teacher reads a page. Silver flashes mean one net. A brown ripple asks for another. A sudden stillness is the sign to wait. He knows where the currents fold and where the mud holds, where the old branches hook and where the water shivers over a hidden trunk. Sometimes he speaks to the river aloud, careless and gentle. Will you carry this day for me? Will you soften this memory and return it as rain? The river answers as it always has, with patience. At a bend where the water deepens to green, the ferryman cuts the oar and lets the boat drift. The current presses against the hull, steady as breath. He thinks of the Nilometer at Rhode Island, those carved columns that measured the Nile's rise and promised bread or warned of hunger. He thinks of the Chicago River turned by human will to flow away from the lake. He thinks of the Mississippi reversing under hurricane winds and under the shudder of the New Madrid earthquakes long ago. Rivers, like dynasties and stories, can be persuaded to turn. Yet the tunnel sap needs no engineering to unspool its path. It obeys the pull of distant mountains and a moon whose face is carved upon temple lintels and incense holders, upon bronze bells that fit into the palm. In that obedience is a secret strength. To reverse without breaking is a kind of wisdom. Evenings on the landing, the ferryman listens to elders recite fragments. Some speak of Jayataka, the great beret near Ta Prohm, now sleepy with lotus and shadow. Some whisper of later kings who forgot how to listen to water and built too quickly, too rigidly, against a living tide. A passing monk smiles and points to the line where water licks the wood. See how the flood writes and writes again. Far away, at Angkor Wat, the bas-reliefs of churning oceans unfurl in stone. Devis and Azuras straining at the serpent's body to draw the nectar of immortality from a cosmic sea. The ferryman has stood before those carvings and felt the river in his chest. He understands the tale. To renew the world is to move the waters until they reveal what they hid. But every churning wears the rope. He wonders what rope modern hands are pulling, and how long it can hold. There are nights when he wakes to the low booming of distant drums from the festival, and the river answers with its own drum, a dull knock against the stilts, a swirl that sets pots to a soft, irregular tapping. He lights a lamp and watches moths orbit the flame like small planets, and he thinks of the lake at its greatest reach, when villages float and the horizon dissolves into a thin band of cloud. In such months, time is water. You live by flood, by fish, by the slow lake road between trees whose roots are ankle-deep in stars. In dry season, time is dust. Both seasons carry the same hymn. On a morning of low clouds, a young scholar joins him, a woman from Phnom Penh who studies the archaeology of water. Her pack carries calipers and a notebook, and a small vial to gather silt, which she calls the archive. She speaks of LiDAR maps revealing the ghost grid of anchors avenues beneath jungle and field, of ancient spillways and diverted canals, of choke points where sediment built up like unsorted memories. She tells him that the city's brilliance lay not only in stone but in listening, in knowing when to open and when to close, how to let the flood carry away and how to hold it long enough to nourish rice. She dips a jar into the green water and holds it up to the light. In the suspended grains, the ferryman sees glitter, mica, sand, the dust of old bricks, a fleck of shell. She smiles. This is time floating. They anchor the boat beneath a canopy of leaves where small bells hang from a shrine, blown by a wind that smells of rain. She has come also to ask about a rumor, that during the last great drought, the river revealed a row of laterite blocks not far from here, as if a causeway had once crossed to a small island. He nods and takes her to the place. The water is higher now, but he points to where the current changes color, a darker thread crossing a field of pale. She marks a map with care, and for a while they simply listen to the surface. A fish rises and disappears without a sound. The bells speak in small, bright syllables. Somewhere upriver, a boy laughs and the laugh travels along the bank and becomes an echo that does not end. When the scholar leaves, she presses the vial into the ferryman's hands and asks him to keep it until she returns. It is heavy for its size. He sets it in a niche by his bed and watches how, each evening, the grains settle to a thin line, then lift again when the hut shakes with footsteps or rain. He finds himself measuring days by how quickly the dust falls. He does not open the vial. He knows that to open anything too often is to lose it. The reversal comes late that year. Distant dams and a wavering monsoon hold the flood back until the calendar frets. The fishers mutter. The markets wait. The bells are rung with more urgency than joy. Then one night the pressure changes, almost imperceptibly. The air thickens. Somewhere far away the Mekong sighs, and in the narrow throat of the tunnel sap the water pauses, considers and turns. In the morning, the ferryman rows against a current that was not there yesterday, and every pilaster, every post, speaks in new tones. He smiles without realizing it. The river has remembered itself. By midday, flecks of drift reeds, a strip of woven mat, a single sandal worn smooth by years, move past his landing on their way toward the lake. He watches them pass like the small offerings they are. He remembers a woman who came in the dry season long ago to throw a strand of hair into the current, asking the river to carry away her grief. He remembers a shrine at the forest's edge where old coins sleep in jars beneath the roots, their faces soft as breath. He remembers the drought year when he found the bronze bell, and the years when he found nothing at all but light and silence.